Jocelyn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I love being on the show. I'm so happy that you invited me.
This is a long time coming because I met you in the spring when I spoke at the H&H America show, and you had a question, and then we talked after and you told me about your story. I'm like, okay, that is brilliant. I need to have you on the podcast. So I'm so happy that it's like months later. Right now we're recording this at the end of the summer. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm so excited to hear your story of the brand.
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about what the business is overall, and then you can just keep going with the questions. But very briefly, it's a yarn shop and a wine bar, which immediately stumps people. And it's really that. So we have, I would say, a 700 square foot space, quite small. And in the middle, there's an L-shaped wine bar that seats about 9. In the front of this space is where most of our retail products are. And then in the back third of the space, we have more retail and a small table where we can seat 4 people and offer different craft classes. And so our aim, by our, I mean myself and my boyfriend who runs the wine bar, our aim is really to provide a really superior experience in both aspects of the building, of the business. So it's not as if like either part of it is an afterthought. When you look at the wine bar, we have pretty basic food, but for example, our summer menu are lobster rolls, shrimp cocktail, probably a soup that changes weekly, some warm dish that changes weekly, but it's really like 5 or 6 things, and cheese boards and charcuterie boards are pretty standard. And then on the yarn shop side, because it's such a small space, and because, I mean, let's face it, most people that are shopping online, the things that we have are really, really special. And because we're in the Hudson Valley, we're surrounded by farms, and a lot of the yarn that we sell is actually local. So it's local sheep, locally spun, locally dyed. And if it's not local, then it's more likely than not a small batch production. So something that is from Cape Town, South Africa, but a female-owned business and hand-dyed yarn. And then we don't only have yarn. Like I said, we have classes. And then we don't only focus on knitting, which is what maybe traditionally yarn shops have done. We actually span the range of what you would call the fiber arts. So crochet, spinning yarn, weaving, sewing. Recently, we've done quite a bit with sashiko, which is Japanese embroidery. And we have classes in essentially all of the things. So it's really a business and endeavor that is something that Todd and I are both very passionate about, and we just throw our whole selves into.
I mean, like I said, when I first met you, I loved the concept, and now hearing about it and how they're local, like sheep. And I mean, that is incredible. I have questions now. We're going to start from the beginning. What did you and your boyfriend do prior to this?
Sure. So for myself, and part of the impetus for starting this business, for 14 years, I worked at a foundation, and this was in New York City, and I invested in social entrepreneurs. So it was essentially private equity, but we had funds that were charitable funds. Essentially, they would otherwise possibly be used for grant making, but I was able to use them for what's called impact investing. And I would make an equity investment or a loan investment into a company that was a for-profit company, but the entrepreneur, the business owner, was doing something beneficial to society. And so I did that for 14 years, mainly in emerging markets. And it was through that I guess I got to see how passionate entrepreneurs were about their own businesses. And towards the end of that time, all of the staff were offered a voluntary separation package. And because I'd been there for a period of time and at the stage of life that I was in, I just thought, well, gosh, like this is a really fantastic opportunity to try something quite risky with a little bit of a safety net. And And so that was my driver. And I mean, many, many other things drove me, but sort of from like a technical and a monetary standpoint, here was an opportunity to take like this little pot of money and some severance payments that I would get a little bit over time to actually try something very different, but essentially seeing what entrepreneurs did and how I supported them as an investor, but being on the opposite side of it.
Wow.
And then for my partner's perspective, he had spent a lot of time early in his career in advertising and marketing. And then more recently, for a handful of years, he worked as a chef in another part of the Hudson Valley. And so it just seemed like with our combination that we could really give this a go. But I will say that he was incredibly supportive of this idea and this project that I wanted to do, but he didn't know that he was going to sort of get wrapped up into it and then keep going with it. Really, as it happens, he helped me start in the first couple of months. We didn't yet have our wine and beer license, but he helped me just start the functioning of the business and the yarn shop and with the renovation, helping oversee the contractors. And then with his day-to-day involvement, it was just abundantly clear to me that, you know, this idea that I had to hire other people to run the wine bar was like nonsense. Like he had to be there. And interesting, like I sort of joke that people come to see him and they don't come to see me because he's really just a like incredibly personable person. So it's just this warmth that we have at the wine bar. And he is a sort of like generator of that. And people love coming by, and it's very much a space where we have like rapidly promoted it to the whole neighborhood, the whole town, the whole Hudson Valley, to New York City visitors. It's not just a yarn shop. It's not just the crazy knitters, who I'm one of them, but it's not just the knitters that are coming. It's just anyone that likes being in a community space around beautiful things with affordable drinks, tasty food, and just like a really relaxed energy, happy and relaxed energy.
Well, it sounds like you absolutely have built a community there, which I love. How did you you've invested in entrepreneurs, and I'm assuming some of them were retailers, but how, when you took basically your nest egg, how did you decide the knitting and the component of the wine bar? Was that, I know it wasn't intended for him to originally be in it, but was it always intended to have both of them merge, or where did you start the process of deciding what you were going to open?
Yeah, it was absolutely from day -1,000 planned to be the two businesses. And the original idea is not mine. I spent probably almost 25 years of my life in New York City until we opened this place in 22 and we started living in the Hudson Valley full time. But for 10 years of my time in New York City, I was in Brooklyn. And for part of the time that I was there was a local yarn shop. That's what they're called, local yarn shops, which is just a small independently owned yarn shop as opposed to Joann's or Michael's. But this yarn shop had a wine and beer license, and they had a bar in their yarn shop, and it was just a thing. And ultimately, over time, they closed. But it was a very warm space, and I saw how that component of the business really added to the environment. And then fast forward to where we are today, my thesis, and I really think it's proved itself out, is that what we're doing is basically this hybrid business that has two complementary businesses, and where each sort of hedges the other. And it really helps the sustainability of the business in so many ways, but it also, we could talk about, like, it also extraordinarily adds to the cost, right? You think about a wine bar, like we've done it quite frugally, but there's no escaping like aspects of cost to the wine business side of it. But if you think about the hybrid business, you have shoppers for yarn, and they're the hobbyists. And so those hobbyists will come in October, November, December, January, when it's cold and you're naturally inclined to think like, hey, I kind of know how to knit. I want to make a hat. I want to make a scarf for my girlfriend, whatever. And then you have the year-round knitters, year-round like hardcore people, and they're shopping all year long. But if you have the wine bar component, it helps the business so much because even if you're crazy about yarn, you will not want to, and you could not afford to come into a yarn shop every single week and buy something. I mean, yarn is not inexpensive, and it is, you just don't need it that frequently, but you want to support your local business, right? So the wine bar being there allows you to support it in some way at a lower cost to you, but just in a easy recurring way. And then when you think about seasonality, the Hudson Valley is really a draw for tourists and especially weekenders from New York City in the fall months, because it's like leaf peeping season and people look at like the beautiful colors changing. And then in the springtime through the summer, right? And so that natural flow to the wine bar and people hanging out, sitting at the bar, having a lobster roll, maybe not buying yarn, like that's supporting the business through revenue flow, you know, offsetting possibly a decrease in the yarn sales. But we're still seeing, interestingly, pretty steady craft sales through the year because, like I said before, I'm not only targeting knitters. So I have tons of kits for making baskets, for making, for like doing embroidery. And so a lot of those kinds of crafts are not really limited to just the cozy months.
It's funny. I had said this, I don't know if I said it in my talk, but like my grandmother was a knitter and a crafter. And, you know, I still have all of, and as my husband does too, we have all of our grandparents' ornaments where they would sit in sewing circles. And they would, I mean, styrofoam balls with a million pins in them in sequence. Yeah. And I was like, our grandmothers must have been on crack. Like how did they do this? I mean, the amount, I mean, some of them must have 1,000 pins in them, like where the styrofoam now is falling apart around it. And you can really see how many are in there. But it's like going to that convention, it was very clear that crafting, I'm air quotes, crafting is a very different world than what I knew because of my grandmother. I mean, she was also a depression baby. So when we packed up her house from when they had to put her in a home, I'm not kidding you, there was 19 yard bags of yarn like that. And she didn't knit anymore, but she had all these like projects, but she, being a depression baby, went to every sale, whatever store, Joann's, Michael, I don't know what it was in the back in the day, but would buy as much as she can. So, you know, that's in my head, that's what I think of crafters. And then going to the show, seeing all these hipsters and like all the amazing, like the craft kits. I interviewed Michelle, who has the crochet kits, and listening to how she built her business and how incredibly different and how amazing some of these things you can make were just, it's mind blowing to me. So like I said, when I met you and you told me this, like all these questions came to mind. And one of them I'll ask you now is, again, you're not in retail. You know what you want to do. How did you approach the design scope of fixturing? Because that was one of the questions I got a lot about, you know, fixturing within yarn shops, because there's only so many ways you can do it. And how do you elevate that? How did you approach the design? So, again, somebody that's not in retail, how did you approach that?
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple ways of answering that. On one hand, just to understand not only fixtures and layout, but just yarn shops more generally, I reached out to people who were already doing it. I also attended that conference 3 years ago before I definitively decided to open a space, because I thought the cost would be worth understanding and helping me make a go, no-go decision, right? So reaching out to people, including one of the owners of the yarn shop in Brooklyn that I mentioned that had the wine bar, right? And also talking to wine bar owners, right? So it was just this massive data collection from talking to people and networks. from a fixtures perspective, one of the comments made by one of the local yarn shop owners that I spoke with was, hey, I invested so much in all this like shelving, but if I could have done it differently, I would have just thrown pegboards everywhere and just used like those, I don't know retail so much that I don't even know what the name of those things are, but like peg hooks, right? Like just throwing peg hooks because yarn naturally fits on them. It hangs nicely. It's more visible, right?
Yeah.
So candidly, I have friends in design. And so I talked to a girlfriend and I got her thoughts, early thoughts on layout. I talked to my architect who I commissioned for the renovation of the space to get different ideas for the fixtures. But it really boiled down to budget. So I like brought over some IKEA shelves from my New York City apartment that I moved out of to rent out since we weren't living there anymore. A local yarn shop across the Hudson River in another part of the Hudson Valley had closed. They gave me their shelving. I put up pegboards in different places. We basically had the contractor do some shelving, install some pegboards, and then we sort of saw we were running out of money on that budget line item and started doing things ourselves, like from Wayfair and what have you. So I think what I had embraced very early on was because of this budget that we had and a frugal mindset, including for the wine bar build out, this was not going to be an elegant space. It was going to be sort of like a farmy, things are thrown together, more of like a flea market type of environment, as opposed to if nice yarn shops, you go in and typically they're pristine, they're beautiful. And that's also quintessentially a yarn shop. And we're not that. And people are totally comfortable with that too, because it's refreshing.
Well, I would guess it's also not as intimidating. Like I know that I've gone into a couple of those stores and one, obviously they're very helpful. How can I help you? I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking at or for. So just kind of, because I did a little bit of a research before I came to the show because I had to do that presentation. And, again, like I had no idea about what the industry is like. I had a question. Now, of course, this is what happens when you get older. You forget things. Well, one thing I love that you did that you listen to Tony Robbins and you listen to Brendon Burchard and all these guys, and they all say, ask questions, ask your mentor to coffee or something like that. And I don't know how many people who are listening to this have tried to do that and how many people ghost you when you are like honestly asking questions. So I love that you asked people who own businesses and no one took it as a threat. No one, because retail's like is very competitive, and retailers, apparel stores especially, everyone holds their secrets very tight. And I think that's the reason why this podcast has gotten so much attention and why everyone really loves that they're learning from other people. But the fact that you had gone in and you had asked people for advice and what worked and what didn't, and they gave it to you says a lot about that industry, that, it's not the competitive cutthroat and like, don't worry about it. I love that did you have any pushback from anybody about that? Was everyone open arms? Like, absolutely.
I picked the people that I reached out to. So, I picked people who I wouldn't have an immediate direct competition link to or threat from. So including New York City. So I would say when you're looking at the perspective of a local yarn shop, your in-person sales are really disproportionately going to be people that are driving distance from you. So New York City is not really a competitor to me.
Yeah.
And then I did get feedback from a local yarn shop that is more in my area. But that was more not because I was soliciting feedback, but just because we were talking as two business owners. And essentially in this instance, I went to visit a close by yarn shop and I just introduced myself because I was effectively like a competitor opening up nearby. And she said, "Oh, I know who you are. Of course people are telling people what's happening. And I forget if I had just opened or if I was opening soon. And I just wanted it to be like, sort of like, we can at least just get along. And I think it was in that conversation where she shared something helpful to me, but just in passing. And also because, well, it's a fait accompli. So I'm not going to stop her from opening her shop anymore. I would also say, I would guess that it maybe is slightly less competitive because yarn shops are a bit of a specialty shop. So it's not that easy to just open another one, like just open another clothing store. I would guess it's a little bit easier to open a clothing store. And I could be wrong on that, but because there's, in relative terms, very, very few yarn stores, I think there's a little bit more respect versus immediate competition as the knee-jerk reaction.
I would think so. With the when you started to source your product, and you had said a lot of it's women-owned, a lot of it's local. How did you approach that? Did you already know source? Because you were already a knitter, so did you already know brands that you wanted? Did you? I mean, because it's not like, I mean, the H&H America show was the first one I've seen that's craft. So it's like for us, or for retailers that are in gift or apparel, there's giant shows that are built around it. Magic just happened. That's a huge apparel show that's in Las Vegas. The gift show has like 4 massive buildings across the country with floor after floor. The craft industry doesn't really have that. So how did you go out and start sourcing products for this?
Yeah. So, a bit of it was like deliberate, planned, and strategic. And a bit of it was just like, oh, hey, I talked to this person. That looks good. But from the strategy perspective, I first had to think through almost like an outline, and this might have been some guidance from a couple of yarn shop owners in my initial research, but things like, what are the different kinds of yarn that just have to exist in a yarn shop? And so, there's like the fill in the blanks. Okay, well, how am I going to fill in those blanks? And so that's where I used as a first filter, are they local? And then if they were local, I would get the product and I would try the product. And if I liked it, then it would make sort of the short list. If I didn't like it, just because it was local, it wouldn't go on the shelf. I just don't have enough shelf space. I don't have enough budget. If it's not going to sell, if I don't like it, I can't sell it. I can't rah about it.
Yeah.
So it was the local, like the Cape Town yarn. I sort of wanted that yarn. I thought about that yarn because I met the owner on a work trip 10 years ago.
Wow.
That business that I had, the foundation that I worked for, I just, in my free time and my work travel, I would find fiber artists and I would, in the evenings, go to their studios and talk to them. And so this was that kind of example. And then coincidentally, she was at the first H&H conference. So it made it easier to source from her, but it was yarn that I respected and liked enough that I might have gone through the hoops of sourcing internationally directly. But thankfully, it was easy to reconnect with her through that trade show. But looking for local, understanding the bare bones kinds of yarn that I needed to have, and then having a point of view, I wanted it to be essentially all natural. Only recently did I bring in yarn that is a wool blend, meaning wool and a little acrylic, because across the board in my yarn shop, because of the quality of the materials and the small producer nature, it's a higher price point. But also the area that I live in, it's mixed income, blue collar, some New York City weekenders. But I wanted it to be a space that offered something not only on the food and beverage side, but also on the shop side, where it doesn't matter your budget. You can find something that you can afford and you can have fun with crafting.
That's great.
Yeah. So, lots of other drivers went into it, but the last thing maybe to say on sourcing and choosing, Remarkably, it was really like my old job, because in my old job, I had an investment budget and I would find good investment companies to invest in. And then I would make the case to make that investment. And then that would go in my portfolio. And that was very much how I treated the companies that I looked at.
You could tell
in the yarn portfolio.
You could tell. That's what I was thinking. Your thought process is very different than a lot of the owners. I'm like, I love it. But I think that for retailers that are just opening, I think that gives them a great sense of another way of sourcing and to understand how you really went at it in a different way than most retailers. Like, it's like a lot of people just buy what they like. I mean, I'm not going to lie. And you really, everything was important from where it was sourced to, like the natural, I mean, you approached it much like an investor, which is like really smart. With the cloud. Okay, wait. I'm trying to keep my questions like in line. So with the bar, was it because I know for California and for other states, when it comes to a beer and wine license, like that is crazy expensive, and obviously that was part of your budget. Was it more than you expected? Was it less? And how, with the rest of the budget, how did the restaurant play into your budget?
Yeah. So the process of applying for the wine and beer license and then paying for the license, it was expensive, but it wasn't bonkers bananas expensive. And I think it's a little bit because we went for the wine and beer. We didn't go for the full liquor. Once you apply for the full liquor license, at least in New York State, but probably in most places, you need a full restaurant. We don't have a full service restaurant. We don't have a kitchen on site. Food is prepared off site. But when you have the wine and beer license, you do need to serve food. And it's more than just potato chips, right? So there definitely is a cost to it. Oh. I think some of the surprises to me from a money perspective were the insurance is kind of meaningful. Like it's expensive. Insurance is expensive, but it just all factors into our budget. I think where we reined things in is really the build out of the wine bar. And like, I would probably say, as a general matter, you're not spending less than $80,000, right, to build a wine bar. And there's many wine bars, especially in the cities, where it's like easily $500,000, easily a couple $1 million. Our wine bar is not that. But it's also not a couple of folding chairs and, so it all just is rationalized for the space. It's not inexpensive. And we're like really looking at like, hey, is this gonna work? But, yeah, because it's for the people who are listening. Like, I've been in the restaurant industry and I've been in store opening or restaurant openings, and like, one of my accounts, like Concept, who's an like a 200,000 square foot antique store, took a part of the space and rented it out to Baron and Boy Coffee. And the build out on that for coffee, this is not even alcohol, coffee and pastries that are made outsourced and they brought them in. The amount of things they had to go through, both in permitting and health department and cutting lines in for water and the water temperatures, like it's a whole other animal than retail. And the fact that you guys did this together, it's like balancing two giant retail projects, and they're one, but the restaurants are a whole other animal. And I think that's the reason why when you told me that, not only just how amazing and all the things I could think about as people on a Friday night drinking wine, knitting, like that's amazing. But it really is two totally separate businesses that are major. I mean, and I just keep thinking of, like I said, Lit Concepts build out. And P.S. that opening was 4 months late. It took them 4 months longer to get done. Like they missed the whole holiday season, and it was all because, and maybe California is much more stringent, but I'm pretty sure when it comes to like health departments and all of that, it's not like, oh, okay, you're fine. Like there's a lot of hoops to go through. I mean, in my case, I think it helped with my boyfriend, and he was comfortable with all of that because he's, accustomed to the annual health department audit and making sure everything is in good order. And when it's our kind of space and not a full service kitchen, not a 200-seat restaurant, like we're easy peasy in relative terms. And then from like the approval perspective, I went to see the health department guy and I said, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. And this is the architect that I'm going to use. And here's his initial plan. He looked at the plan and he just gave light feedback. And I had the architect make the changes. And it was this guy, like he has 20, 30 years of experience working with restaurants, trying to get approval for their business. And he just told me outright like that he really valued that I just respected him. And I respected him because, hey, he has to give me what I need and I better do what he says. And also I didn't know what I was doing. So if he wants me to do something, I'll do what he says. Right. But I think he had the experience where people who were deeply knowledgeable about restaurants made me push back on him. So he didn't have that conflict with me. And so everything went easily.
I'm sure. Because I'm sure ego from a lot of restaurant owners, ego was a giant part of it. And, those guys like building inspectors here, like it's the same thing. It's like, but I love that you went in there and you just kind of like, hi, I'm, this is what I'm going to do. And you came to him, which obviously, that meant a lot for those guys because I'm sure they're not used to that at all.
Yeah. And I mean, Kingston, where we're based, it's 2 hours north of New York City. It's a city. It was the first capital of New York State back in the day until Albany became the capital. But it's a city of 24,000 people, which is teeny. So everyone sort of ultimately in the end ends up knowing everyone. And so the same health department guy who I talked about the plans with, he was at the Italian festival, which was in the neighborhood where our shop is. And my build out wasn't done yet, but it was partially done. And he was there with his then girlfriend and we say hello. And I was like, hey, come on in, see the space. And so we looked at how it was going and he like just sort of presumably felt like, oh, okay, like I'm part of this. She's doing what I'm telling her. Everything looks fine. Like it's just,
that's great.
I think like help people help you out and just get things done, right? Like, why do you have to fight people?
I think that's very, very good advice. Cause I think that, I know I've done it. Push back. And the results have not always been very good. Not gonna lie. Once you were ready to open, how did you handle marketing to get people there? I know if you're in a smaller town, obviously there's already a little bit of a buzz about a new business going in. So how did you market it to get people in the door? Because I think a lot of people, that's the last thing they think about. And it's like the door's open and then they're like, no one came in because there was no market prior.
Yeah. So back to my budget, which I had a very teeny budget. So we didn't really have money for advertising spend. One of the things I did before I left my last job was I used the tuition credit to take a digital marketing class. And it was with General Assembly, and I'm not an affiliate, but it was a really good class and I do recommend it. And I don't remember, maybe it was like an 8-week class and they just took you through everything. The screen froze. Took you through everything like fundamental that you need to know about social media marketing. And that was invaluable. And we found the space in May of 22. We finally signed the lease in July. We found the contractor that summer, which was very hard to do because Hudson Valley, post-pandemic, everyone's buying a house up here. Everyone wants it renovated or torn down and rebuilt. I mean, it's bananas still. But we found the contractor. He started the work after Labor Day. We opened in October. Because I had the space signed in July, and because we're in a high foot traffic area on the waterfront, at that time, that summer, there was a weekly Saturday farmers market. I put up a folding table in front of this space that was being renovated, that wasn't done yet. I put yarn in front and I just said, hey, yarn shop coming. And I just chatted with people and people got excited about it. I also started posting on Instagram before we opened and just posted like crazy. And so by the time we opened, we already had like this little, these people waiting to get in the door. And so that was something that I think went wow.
That is so smart. I love that you said it's like so grassroots. Like, well, it's also like you have very much created a community, and it's very clear from the very beginning of you being outside of your store, saying hello to people, answering questions, introducing yourself. I mean, that is very community based. That's very grassroots, which I absolutely love, because I don't think a lot of people would have, I hate to say it, the patience to do that. And it's like some of these things that you're doing are you need to be patient. Like the fact that you went to school and you used the education dollars to go to school and learn that, like you're doing it very different than all the retailers I know did it. And I love that, because you really are, you really attacked it like a research, you are researching your own brand.
And I don't know if what I did was right, but it seemed right at the time. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't read a book about, I mean, I went to business school, but I didn't work in retail. I didn't work in marketing. So even if I learned a few things, I didn't apply those things, I don't think. But I think I just tried to make the most of like all the things that I had. So I already had that lease. So I'm not just going to let it sit there until we open, right? I had the right to sit in front of the space that I was leasing and just let people know that we were around. I mean, certainly at the time, I didn't know if it was the best use of my time, but what else was I going to be doing, right? I was unemployed. And I mean, I think there was one other thing I was going to say. But yeah, I think the thing is, I don't know if any of it is scalable. I don't know that it was the most efficient thing to do, but it definitely was something I did in service of the overall business that I definitely think helped. I don't know if I could have paid someone to do that, because it just, I was sitting there for hours.
It's also not young too. I mean, and with social media, for you, it was you standing in front of your store. No one knows your business as well as you do, and can talk about it passionately. And I think that, the same is for social media, for those who don't want to go on stories and go live or whatever. People want to know you. People want to know who's behind the business, and you are the best brand advocate that there could be. And I think that's brilliant, to be honest, because again, like most people are so involved in the opening that they aren't even there. They don't go to the job site until, weeks before it's ready to open, certainly not sit there and say hello and shake hands and stuff like that. But I think that has everything to do with the community that you've built. Mm-hmm. I have to ask you about now, explain to us what a typical busy afternoon looks like with a host of the knitters and the crafters and then the wine bar. Are the worlds colliding, or are they two separate conversations, or are people mingling, or do tell?
Yeah, so it's very much a mingling. And so day one of opening was a Wednesday. And I think it's somewhat standard that yarn shops on Wednesdays have knit night. And this is a night that's open to the community, and people just sit at the yarn shop and they knit. And so we opened on a Wednesday, we had a knit night, and we right off the bat had 8 or 10 people. And those same people kept coming week on week on week, and more people kept coming. And so we're almost 2 years old, and our Wednesday knit nights, which Wednesday is our start of our week, because like a restaurant, we're closed on Mondays, Tuesdays. Wednesdays we open. We're pretty quiet in the afternoon. We're quiet on most weekday afternoons. And then Wednesday night, we'll have anywhere from, 15 to 30 people in the space. Wow. In a space that, because of the retail, really can only comfortably seat like 24 people. But those front retail tables, I think this might have been my question in your session at the conference. The front tables are full of retail. And before knit night, I push all that stuff somewhere else so that a dozen people can sit around the tables. And then 9 people can sit on bar stools around the L-shaped bar, and then a few people can stand around. So on a typical knit night, you'll have 15 plus knitters, crocheters, weavers, whatever is like a small little project that someone chooses to bring. And then you'll often have their partners, and the partners are hanging out, sitting at the bar. And it's just, and then you also have, because we promoted this rapidly, you'll have neighborhood people because they know Wednesday is a busy night and it's just fun to socialize there. And we have regularly had people from Kingston come by and they'll just say, wow, this is the most happening place in Kingston on a Wednesday. And that's probably true because it's Wednesday, right? And then Thursday has tended to be a bit quiet for us. But we did paint and sip monthly for a little while, but we're like, trying to stick to our knitting. So we're not really doing that as much these days. And then Friday will be busy again because you have the neighborhood people coming in for a drink at the end of a work week. And so many of them are not knitters, and many people are coming in just for their dinner. And then Saturday is our busiest retail day, like bar none. And then Saturday evening will also be busy. So Wednesday and Saturday night might be comparably busy with a mixed crowd. And then Sunday is a busy day for retail.
I did not realize, so when the Wednesday knit nights, like that's standard for most. How did that?
I don't know if it's standard, but like many do it. Yeah.
And people just bring their craft, and I guess it's like the knitting circles that my grandmother went to.
Yes.
Bring their own craft. Now, because this makes me think about, I worked for a lady, and she had a store that was in a neighborhood that was high trafficked. It was home and gift, and she had a huge coffee table collection. She had sold furniture, so she had sofas everywhere. And what ultimately started happening was people they'd come in, they'd grab coffee table books, and they'd start reading, and they literally would not leave that space. And I remember one afternoon she walked through, it was like, I couldn't believe she said this at the top of her lungs. What am I, Barnes and Noble? And it was like, what? So they're profitable, I'm assuming, because people are eating and drinking. Are they buying as well? Or is it just really, this is more of a community event for everyone to hang out, and you go into it knowing we're not going to turn a lot of money. It's really about having everyone here.
So it's yes to all of it, but not the latter. And so Wednesday is a good revenue night for us because of the wine bar. People are coming, they're hanging out. Not everyone is ordering, but many are. And many who are also having their dinner there. Mm-hmm. And so this is in our sort of knit night description: free community gathering, community building. We're happy if you patronize our wine bar. It helps our business sustainability. So people really know, like, hey, I'm not in the market for yarn tonight, but I'm going to get a glass of wine. And then a lot of people do shop that night. But again, like, you may only need to buy 10 balls of yarn to make that sweater every 3 months, right? So once you did that last week, you're not going to do it again for a little while.
Yeah.
Unless you love shopping and you have the budget. But we also have people who are, we also are in an area where there's many restaurants around us. And when we are open on Wednesday nights and it's dark outside, we are a well-lit retail space with beautiful colors on the wall. So people are leaving their dinner and drinks, they're walking to their car, and they're seeing 20 people laughing, drinking, doing yarn things. And they're like, what is going on? They come in, like, what is going on? Todd is like, come have a drink. These people have another drink. They have the dessert that they didn't have at the restaurant. They say, oh, my sister loves knitting. And then they bring their friend or their sister in.
Wow.
Next week. Right. So it's like a bit of like, even marketing just being open. Right.
Yeah.
And then there was one other thing to say about that, but slipped my mind. It's okay.
I have visions of, or has this happened yet? Excuse me. Of somebody having way too much wine and it gets a little rowdy.
Yeah. So people ask that all the time, but people don't drink like that. And I think on one hand, it's because it's a wine bar. So at wine bars, people don't tend to get loaded. I think that happens at like your dive bars or at full liquor bars, but we don't have a full liquor license. So, and then also people who are coming for yarn, like I would say, would rather spend money on yarn than alcohol. So your average person coming to the yarn shop is having a beer or two, or a glass of wine and a cheese board. They're not coming there to get drunk. And the only instance where we had to throw someone out is because this was a person who, like, he was a male and he wasn't into yarn, and he had already had one drink elsewhere, and then he had another drink with us, and he was just getting a bit rowdy, but that was just him. And so that happens. We're lucky that it's just one person. And
I just envision like a tape, because I live in Oregon now, and we're surrounded by vineyards. And in Jacksonville, which is 10 minutes away, there's 3 really prominent vineyards that do tastings. And it's like, my friend who's lived here much longer than I, she's like, just wait, Saturday night, she'll hear sirens, because it's like people get hammered at wine.
Wow.
Because they're light. So they're like only little glasses. But, I just pictured like, all these women coming in together and chatting and having wine. And then next thing you know, it's like, oh, it's time to go. And like, we're here.
Yeah, we haven't had, really, and I mean, touch wood, but we really haven't had instances like that. And in many cases, people that come in as groups, it's a family or it's girlfriends, but they came in a car and there's one person who's driving. So there's a responsible person. And then also this is an area where people drive. And so I think people know what they're able to do before they need to drive home and where they need to stop. And then Todd also obviously pays attention. Everyone's taken like the alcohol awareness courses and stuff. And like, we'll just feed someone if he feels like that will help the situation. Right.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, it's like I said, you were running 2 totally separate businesses. And I think back on things of my days at restaurants, and then I think about my days of retail, and it's like the 2 are merging in your business. But I seriously think it's like one of the most brilliant. And again, because crafting and whatnot is not my genre, but when you had introduced yourself and said, and your name, Yarn Farm, I love that. How did you come up with the name?
So, it may surprise you, but it's not because of the farms around here. It's because in my old job, one of the areas that I worked in was agriculture investing, but I didn't invest in like huge farms. I invested in businesses and farms that helped smallholder farmers in Africa and India. And so these farmers have like an acre of land and they're just getting by. And if they just get a little help, they can actually become profitable and commercial enterprises. And so it was really thinking of those farmers and that like go-getter, like persevere at any cost, help your farmer friend, help your community, like that spirit that I wanted, to like capture in the yarn farm. The yarn part of it makes sense. And then Kingston, just because I really wanted it to be like based in this area, this community, but also like, hey, if this is a smart idea, why not franchise, right?
I was just going to ask my questions. Is franchising like in top of mind for you?
I don't know. It's not out of the question because I could see why it would be a smart thing. There's so much enthusiasm by people that come into this space. And I see again why like the hybrid business makes space, but not to overly promote Todd and me, but we are really, really putting so much into this business and sacrificing a lot. And I don't think it's that easy. Like, so I don't know that it's just like, hey, here, take this playbook and do it. Right. It takes so much of what experience he and I each have and our commitment to it. I don't know if that can be just handed off to someone.
I know we've almost spent an hour, but I have to still have a couple questions. One is I get this a lot with my husband because he's my builder and he travels with me to jobs and he builds out a lot of the things I do. And somebody'd ask, because everyone keeps saying, will you guys do a podcast together? And one question that keeps coming up is like, do you ever get in arguments? And then what happens when you go home? So I'm going to put that question to you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll say Todd and I have not been together for a long time. It's been a handful of years. We started doing this business endeavor together because he supported my enthusiasm for the idea. He said, go do it, honey. This is great. And then he stayed with me to run the business with me. But we're both strong-minded people. And I guess it's maybe funny to say we've only broken up once. It came to a head at a certain point where we really were struggling with how do we make this work? Because, it's a new business. We're doing it on a budget, on a frugal budget. We're both dependent on this business. We both have strong personalities and we don't agree on everything. Right. So it's not easy.
Yeah.
I think what we try to do is respect turf. Right. So I, by and large, run the yarn business and yarn shop, and he runs the wine bar. But overall, I'm like back office, and overall, I'm making the payments to things. Right. So and it's my business. I own the business. But he's put considerable sweat equity into it by this point. Right. So I think we hit a difficult point, but we probably have cleared that. Yeah, I'm sure I know relationships have ended over things like that.
I mean, I think just the building, just the stress of building it out like that, just that time. Because once it's open, everyone goes to their corners and you're busy doing your own thing. But before it's open, it's just the two of you making decisions and having to go through all this. That seems to be where it's like building a house. Why so many people almost get divorced building their dream house together because of whatever decisions, and money being the biggest part of it is usually what the biggest thing is. So people always ask me that, and it's like, Dave, because we didn't record it yet, we haven't released it, but he, when I asked him, he's like, I know when to back off, he said. Uh-huh. And he's like, and honestly, at the end of the day, it's your business. And, you, and he's like, I may have my ideas and whatnot, but at the end of the day, it's, it's your client and your business. And I was like, I feel kind of bad now. But, I guess stay in your lane is the best, knowing what each job responsibility, because it is not easy and we're not together by means at all 24/7, as opposed to when you got everything together. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I have to ask you what Christmas is going to look like I have two more questions. This is the other one.
Uh-huh.
What is Christmas going to look like in your retail space?
Well, thanks for asking. Remarkably, Christmas is important, but our Christmas is really in October, in that there's an enormous sheep and wool festival in our area, meaning 20 minutes away across the Hudson River in a town called Rhinebeck. And it's so popular and so well known by this subculture of knitters and crocheters, et cetera, that it's called Rhinebeck. But it's actually the New York State Sheep and Wool Festival. It happens annually on the third weekend of October.
Wow.
And on the Dutchess County Fairgrounds, 20 to 30,000 people come over the course of that weekend. And so those same people come to our yarn shop, and we'll have a couple thousand people in our doors.
Wow.
And we make our month's income in that one weekend. So That's our Christmas. And what we do is, in advance of that week, we plan out programming and we post this on our website and we share it in our newsletter. And it's essentially, I'm choosing what is the special yarn that I really want to showcase at that time. And that I do with my existing suppliers. And then I also pick new, small batch dyers. And then Todd will just make sure that the wine bar can handle that level of demand. We have outdoor seating. We have a permit for an outdoor cafe, and we keep it open through that time so that we can handle the flow of people that come. And then we'll have our beverage partners come and do tasting. So hard cider from a local hard cider place, and then a local craft brewery, and then a local vineyard. And so those are tastings on 3 different nights, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, so that not everyone is trying to get into the small space. They can socialize outside and look at some retail space that we have set up outside too. So that's our Christmas, honestly.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Okay, final question for you is, I ask everybody, is how, because we're all creative in our business, how do you stay inspired? What do you go to when you're feeling like I need some inspiration? What are your go-tos?
Yeah, I would say I allow my inspiration and my interests to really drive me. So the latest thing has been sashiko embroidery, Japanese embroidery. And so in the course of this year, I've taken 2 workshops with a sashiko master. And because I've trained with him, I can now teach other people. And it's also something that opens up a whole array of retail products. And it's also products that they're just not at all the yarn shops. They're never at Michael's and Joann's. And if you're into this, or if you would like to be into this, like, I'm a source for this. And hopefully soon I'll get an online store going. That's just another thing on the list. So it's really like listening to what is my thing for right now, and not saying, no, stick to your knitting. It's like, well, follow that. If it's still within the range of what you can offer your customer, like, open that up to them too. I also, as much as budget permits, like, I really like to travel, and I still go to New York City as much as I can, which is not very much because I'm still running this business. But, you know, I lived in the city for 25 years before moving here full time. So in many ways, it's still my home. So I still need to reconnect to that energy, because there's no energy like New York City.
I know.
Yeah. And then I also, maybe not for like just boosting creativity, but exercise is really important. I opened this business and I didn't really do anything for like a year and a half, but focus on the business. I really didn't exercise. And I have taught yoga for many years. So finally I'm able to start teaching again, practicing very regularly. And so, like, that's another part of my life, and that's very important to keep me balanced.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time. There's so many nuggets in this interview that I just know our retailers are going to love this so much and learn so much. So thank you so much for being so open and sharing. And I knew it when I met you. I knew this was going to be good.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel like I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I still don't know a lot. And I'm sure so many people in your audience are like, oh my God, where is she coming from? Like,
no, that's what's so refreshing. I mean, honestly, it's so refreshing because it was very grassroots, and it's very, and that's what I think is so incredible, is just you have handled it in a completely different way than most retailers have. And it's like, it is paid off. Like, your success and your business and your brand are obviously a direct association with you.
Yeah. And I would say if anyone listens to this and like would love to reach out to me and share like thoughts they have on my business, I mean, I would really welcome that from people experienced in the industry, because we're still super early on, and like everything that I can learn is so valuable. And people can reach me by just emailing hello@yarnfarmkingston.com, or a direct message on Instagram.
Tell everyone your socials also. So
we're only really active on Instagram. It's at Yarn Farm Kingston. And then the general email address again is hello@yarnfarmkingston.com. And then we have that website, yarnfarmkingston.com.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. This was such a joy.
Thank you.